Working Cows Podcast, episode 279. This episode is brought to you by Farming Without the Bank.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. This is Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows Podcast, recorded exclusively in the C90 Ocean Minerals Studios. And this episode is brought to you by Farming Without the Bank. None of you are farming like you did 100 years ago. So why are you financing it like you did 100 years ago? The biggest part of your operation is the money that runs through your hands, and you let someone else control that. The bank gets the final say in what you get money for and when you pay it back. For many, this is a great relationship until it's not. Farming Without the Bank shows you how you can take back control of your money so you can make the bank Plan B instead of Plan A. This is done by creating your own banking system that you own and control. To learn more, tune into the Farming Without the Bank podcast or go to farmingwithoutthebank.com to get the book. Once you've read the book, Mary Jo will meet with you one-on-one and help you determine where and how to get started. She will most likely also touch on some estate transition ideas, financing ideas, business growth or startup ideas, and many other things that she has experience with from helping thousands of farmers and ranchers. Go to farmingwithoutthebank.com today or check out the Farming Without the Bank podcast. Very excited to share with you today a conversation that we had among some of the podcasters of regenerative agriculture, Brian Alexander, Jared Luhman, and Jason Medows. All three of us got together and sat down and just had a conversation about what it's been like over the last couple of years, some of the things that we see coming in the industry, some of the things that we are interested in, and some of the things that we're keeping an eye on. And it was just a great time to have a little bit more of a ranching reboot style conversation, I would say. So hope you enjoy this conversation. We'll see you on the back end with some more notes about what's coming up on the Working Cows podcast.
Jared, I'm kind of curious, have you had any interesting experiences with fans in public?
Not too much. I'd say the one thing that was closest was at Doug Ferguson's Sell by Marketing School when I went to that one, and I walked in and Doug was like, "Oh, there's Jared Luhman. He's the Herd Quitter podcast guy." And like they all came and shook my hand like I was some sort of a celebrity. And it's like, well, this is unusual.
You're a big deal, man.
Any sort of a reception like that, but it was nice to know that. I think that was the first time I'd ever been to some sort of an ag event since I did this podcast, and actually had people who listened to my podcast like meet them in person, and that was kind of neat because most of you have every now and then people reaching out via social media, but that was the first in-person thing, so that was pretty cool.
What about you, Jason? Anything like that happen to you?
I met your buddy CK down at Nat GLC. Gosh, I guess that's been over a year ago now. That was pretty cool. Just lots of people who listen to all the podcasts, and it's really cool. Not that I claim that it's to have fans per se, but I think it's really cool to know that people actually do, like, those aren't just bots listening to the podcast, that they're actually real people listening to the podcast and they're getting real value out of it. It always seems to come whether it be in person or on social media, that kind of jolt of energy of somebody talking to me about the podcast seems to come at just the right time. Like when I'm frustrated with things, or, the workload seems like it's a lot. It comes right at the right time and gives me that just little burst and makes it all worth it.
I definitely agree with that, like, there's been several times that well-placed, well-timed feedback from a fan has been like, put a little bit more fire, put a little fire under the boiler, a little more gas in the tank, kind of keep me going.
Sure. Yeah.
Clay, I'm sure you've got all kinds of stories.
There's one that sticks out, and it's man. So the same night I interviewed Corb Lund, I was at his show. I went down to Rapid City and went to his show. And after the show, of course, there's a mile-long line waiting to get into the bathroom. And I'm talking to somebody. I don't know if it was somebody I was at the show with or somebody just that happened to be there or whatever. And so we're on one side of this wall, and there's no door, but there's a wall between us and where all the people are in the bathroom. And I'm talking to this guy, and I hear from the other side of this wall, I hear Clay Conry out there. And it was
That's awesome.
It was Casey Schumacher, who's at Cal Broker on Twitter. And yeah, he just come out and he's like, "Hey, I listen to your podcast. Keep it up." You know, I was just like, this is weird. I was recognized by my voice.
That is
as
really
some
cool.
dude was washing his hands after using the bathroom.
That's how you know you made it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you, Brian?
What? I guess I've been out in public, often since I started, Red Hills Rancher on social media. But, that really didn't take off until the first time I was on, Working Cows podcast. And that's when, that's when my reach or Red Hills Rancher really started going up. So I was kind of used to being recognized in public for that. But what I was not prepared for was the first time I kind of went back out to, to a soil health event or a grazing event with Grass-Fed Exchange last year down in Fort Worth. That was the first time I'd really been out since I started the podcast. And yeah, it was kind of an experience getting to the registration table. It was probably like two people, but it felt like a sea of people just mobbed me when I got to the registration table, and then trying to walk in and go find a seat. It kind of felt like it was, had to go through several people to do that. But yeah, it's always interesting to meet fans where they are and hear their story. Because every one of them that I meet gives me a better idea of who's listening, and that's one thing I struggle with, and who actually listens to this stuff?
What about local people? Do you guys get local people that come up to you? I work in town, so all the time I'll get people who I don't expect to listen to the podcast whatsoever, not even involved in ag at all. And they'll come up to me and tell me how much they enjoy the podcast. I'm like, wow, you're like the last person that I've ever thought would listen.
Yeah. I don't get too many in my area. I'm mostly all crop country. So there's not many cattlemen who probably listen, but I'm always surprised there's one.
They send you hate mail in your part of the country.
Yeah. I'm fortunate not to have too much of that. But there's a friend of mine's dad, I guess, who it surprises me that if he's listening to this, he's a sugar beet and crop farmer in West Central Minnesota. A friend of mine from college's dad, who apparently is a regular listener and has requested that we bring up 6 grass-fed steaks so he can try them out and see if it's all what it's all what it's cracked up to be. So I guess there's a few people who are listening, but not too many in my community. I would say it's just a wrong demographic for the most part. It seems like, but
sure.
I'd say there's some folks around in the local area that do listen. I'm not sure who all of them are. I guess I just don't go to town. I don't go to town near often enough.
Yeah, I go too much for my liking. So,
Brian, I'm curious if you're what would you say your biggest is it TikTok or podcast that people spot you more, or I don't know, associate you with more?
Probably right now podcasts. I haven't been really terribly active on TikTok, but I don't think I've been around that crowd lately. I don't think I've been near that crowd in person, or maybe I don't even know what that is. There's a bunch of them. Speaking of TikTok, that school we all love, Ranching for Profit, I had 6 or 7 friends off TikTok go to the school, and they all went to Billings. It was wild, and seeing the content that they've all made after they've come back is kind of entertaining.
Yeah. So I think the Ranching for Profit thing is interesting. because I think that, like, especially when Alan Savory and Stan Parsons came, and then even to some extent when Dave Pratt took it over, I think that those guys had to be fighters because the ideas had not been widely adopted. And I mean, most of the people would rather burn Alan Savory and Stan Parsons at the stake when they came here in the 80s than they would listen to them. Mm-hmm. And so I've been kind of ruminating on that shift of how I think these principles have gotten some traction over the last decades, of course, and that maybe those rooms aren't as feisty as they used to be. So would you say that the guys that that went from TikTok were bought in before going?
I'd say most of them were. I don't think one of them was. I don't think. There was one of them that probably didn't really know what they were getting into and wasn't as prepared as they thought they were. Which I think that's a common story. And call back to what you're saying about Stan and Dave and Alan Savory. I remember hearing from my dad, like, stories that people used to get up and walk out. I remember, I'm not going to say that Dave ever threw anybody out, but I'm sure he invited several people to leave. But yeah, I remember stories of like significant numbers of people walking out after the first 2 days, which is, the whole people and group and then economics. And I guess I'll say this, like, if you go with a bunch of ego, you're going to have a bad time.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing that now comes to mind when people ask me, like, what can I do to prepare for ranching for profit? Leave your ego at home. I think that's number one.
That's interesting. I've been thinking about that, and that's kind of one of the questions I want to talk to you about too, is even though not specifically ranching for profit, but the principles that it talks about and like the idea of profitability. I don't know what is it that make people so opposed to it? Is it just as simple as, like, they don't think that it can be better? And so the idea that they're like that by defining them as a hobby, not a business, because their business isn't able to pay them all these fair wages, that just upsets or offends in a way? Or why is there such a negative reaction? And maybe it's not as negative as it once was when Stan and those guys were starting it, but I don't know.
Don't lie.
That's it. Like, they don't lie. So that's why I don't get why there's so much negativity around it.
Well, I think a big part of it is it's almost become, a lot of times, I'm not picking on anybody here, but it's almost become glorified to be like a victim to the circumstances in a way. By the victim of the circumstances in the current ag climate, which to do things in a traditional commodity based way, is not profitable or even break even in that matter. But whenever you kind of challenge the status quo, and take control of the numbers, I think people just, for whatever reason, this isn't just in ranching or whatever, it's just across the board. I think people just are very resistant to that, and they just don't like change.
I think that's it. Exactly. I think it's a paradigm issue. I think, first of all, you've got to recognize that there is another paradigm, right? Like, you ask a fish about water, they say, "What's water?" They don't recognize that there's something else, other option out there. And so I think that they have to, first of all, know that there's something other than what they've been doing. And then I think, Jared, kind of what you said too about the fact that, I got to pay myself what it would cost me to hire somebody else to do these jobs. That is a bridge too far, probably for some people. But I think just the paradigm of, and it's cliche, but it's cliches are cliches for a reason. We've always done it this way. And so people don't want to entertain the idea of doing something different. And so I think that's a big part of it.
I would agree with that. I would definitely agree with that. You know, there's, and again, to kind of call back to some of the early days for ranching for profit, you know, one of the things that Stan Parsons was really famous for, and one of the things Dave Pratt loves to say is, if you want to be a cowboy, get a job. Mm-hmm. Because, you know, there's a big difference between being a ranch manager and running a ranching business and being a cowboy. The two are not the same. And, you know, I said what I said, but if owning a ranch and having horses and cattle is because you want to live your best cowboy dream, okay, fine. That's fine. Just be honest about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I like to, I don't know, sometimes with individuals, I'll walk through an example of, like, say in my area, there's a lot of crop farmers. Like, let's say you tomorrow sold all your equipment and invest it in the stock market. You rent your farm to the neighbor and you work for that neighbor. What's changed in your lifestyle? You still get to run the planter, run the combine. You know, you still get to run on your farm. You still own land. Only not, and if you can do that, you're getting paid for your labor and you're getting paid for your equity, and you're probably making more money than you had been prior. If you can do that, you know, truly, and be more profitable, what have you given up? And that, I don't know, when you put it in those terms, it's maybe a little more easier to kind of see it, but I don't know that a lot of people even think of that as an alternative or an option. But I like, what is it, Dave Pratt, I think, that says, you know, oh gosh, I'm not going to remember exactly how he goes, but something along the lines of, you shouldn't do anything, or you're going to have to help me out now.
You should be getting paid more for doing something than you are for doing nothing.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's, yeah. You knew where I was going with it. Yeah. So I appreciate the save there, but
I could smell what you're stepping in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Glad you were there on that one, Clay, because I had nothing.
Okay. I wasn't
still
really
remember
anywhere close.
My dad came home from the South Dakota Grassland Coalition. I think it might not have been called that yet, but the South Dakota Grassland Coalition Grazing School, you know, quite a while ago, he came home. I was maybe in high school when he came home from that, and he had a copy of Stan's book, If You Want to Be a Cowboy, Get a Job. And yeah, I think that was, you know, even back then it was having an impact, you know, but it was, everybody has extenuating circumstances that keep them from being able to implement these ideas. You know, one of the big ones in my neighborhood is Forest Service leases and wanting to have calves that are mature enough to take advantage of that. You know, so I know a lot of guys that calve in February and March here because the Forest Service doesn't care how much those calves weigh when you turn them out. And so, you know, they'll bring a 700-800 pound calf off the Forest Service in you know, October or November, and it didn't cost them any more to do that than it would have to take a 400 or 500 pound calf off in October or November. So, you know, there's always these reasons why we can't do it that way, but those ideas have been around for quite a while. What do you think keeps people in your neighborhood from implementing these practices?
Well, I think a big part for us is just having to find the resources, or not necessarily the resources, but the knowledge to do so. I mean, it's definitely commodity-based country here, where, I mean, I guess everywhere is, but just the lack of education, I think, is a big part of it. And I think that's really where podcasting really comes in, because we all know that the land grant universities aren't going to, I mean, never say never, but, you know, they're not getting paid to practice and to teach this sort of stuff. So, I mean, therefore, our extension programs are struggling to implement these things. So it really comes from grassroots levels, and by grassroots levels, it's individual producers who are doing things in a certain way, and, you know, it gets spread by word of mouth. And I think that's a huge challenge. And let's face it, these types of practices aren't very popular at the sale barn or the feed store, especially the feed store, because you don't use as many feed. You know what I mean? So, like, you're not very popular a lot of the times when you do these things. So that's a huge barrier to implementing the kind of practices we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, at the time of this recording, sorry, Jared, but at the time of this recording, my most recent episode is the one with Gabe Brown. on the state of the American food system. And I asked him that question. I'll ask you guys the same question. Where are we in relationship to Malcolm Gladwell's mythical, whatever it is, 14 or 17% tipping point as far as regenerative agriculture adoption by actual practitioners? I think that, and maybe I don't know if the fair way to look at that is number of acres. I'm biased being from the West where we use more acres than they do in Missouri and Minnesota. But, in your mind, what do you guys think? What does your experience tell you as far as our proximity to the tipping point?
I don't feel like we're there yet, but I feel like we're on trajectory to get there. When, I don't know, 2.5 years, maybe. Just hold that one. Just pulled that one out.
Predictions. Now we got predictions. This is good.
Hold him to it.
Hey, that's fine. I've been wrong before.
Yeah.
I want to circle back and kind of address your previous question, Clay, which is, what are the things holding up adoption of regenerative practices? And so I have this different perspective because I own the land that I'm managing, that I work on every day. So I am all three. I'm the management unit, I'm the labor unit, and I'm the ownership unit. So if ownership decides that something is in the long-term best interest of the property, I don't have to convince management to do it. And management doesn't have to explain how to do it to labor. So I think the situation that most farmers and ranchers are in is they don't own the property that they're on. And when you don't own the property and you're just there, paying a cash lease or a share crop lease, where's the incentive for you to take a step back in production, which means a smaller check to that landlord that doesn't live there anymore, that probably looks at it once a year? Okay. What's that landlord's incentive to do anything better? What's that producer's incentive to try something else? So I think that's where a lot of the disconnect happens, is that, the ownership lacks the vision to articulate it to management. That's my take.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably very true. Do you think that the ownership tends to lie in an older generation in the same family, or is that a smaller percentage than we might think?
That's an excellent question, and I don't think that we know. Average age of farmers and ranchers in America just kind of keeps going up, up and up and up and up. Sooner or later, there's going to be some sort of demographic collapse or realignment, in our sector, and it's probably coming fairly soon. Look at us. Okay, I'm at the top end, but we're that 35 to 45 age bracket. Some of you guys are on the left side, a little further to the right, but that's okay.
Jared, are you even in your 30s?
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think Jared's even in his 30s.
Oh, man. Are you kidding?
29. Yeah.
Oh, geez.
Man,
I thought
calling me out of my youth and inexperience here.
So, okay, I'm 38. I'll be 39 in June. Jason, where are you at?
I just turned 39.
Okay. I thought we were pretty close. And Brian's the ageless wonder.
Yes.
Military service will do that for a guy.
Yeah, it's the miles, not the years. I just last week I did Soil Health U in Salina, Kansas, and I had some of my friends and previous guests on my podcast came up. We did a panel on the last day. Well, there was a group we were kind of, one group was going to eat Italian, and we're like, no, we're not going to go carb load. And I was like, how about sushi? And several people were like, yes, let's go to sushi. So it ended up me and 4 young ladies and another couple of guys. And, some other folks kind of showed up along the way, and, we had a room at the sushi house. But the point is, nothing make you feel old by hanging out with a bunch of 25 to 28-year-olds all night and listen to them talk.
For sure. Sorry, Brian, I interrupted you. You were going somewhere talking about our age.
I don't know where that was going. So.
Okay, that's all right.
Yeah.
That was
Well,
rude, but
I don't remember either. And so I'll kind of to partially answer that question and stuff too, or at least the things that I think. I don't know if this is realistic or if it's different in crop country versus other places and stuff too. It seems in my area, what I've seen a lot of too that really frustrates me is certain individuals and organizations that almost make out the large farmers or the commodity farmers to be the bad guys and almost the problem. And I think that for a lot of people has now given a black eye to all of soil health practitioners, to where soil health comes in, they say, oh, you're associated with this person who, tried to stop me and sue me when I tried to expand my dairy operation, or you're the person, you're associated. And there's really no connection, but a lot of their soil health individuals and organizations in this area that have been actively, fighting against large scale commodity agriculture, which I don't know, you don't have to agree or disagree with the actual business model. That's fine. But they've now made them out to be the bad people and has given a black eye to the whole soil health industry. And as a kind of working for the Sustainable Farming Association, doing some of this soil health stuff, it seems like I've had people say, oh, you're like this organization. And that gets kind of frustrating and a bummer, because it doesn't have to have, soil health practices and regenerative agriculture can be applied in any form of farm, any, confinement, dairy, hog, large scale crop, large scale beef, or small scale too. I mean, it's applicable everywhere. And it's by kind of segregating out these large farmers as the bad guys, we're missing an opportunity to make huge landscape change, which is frustrating because they control a vast amount of the land, which is a huge opportunity. But maybe that's just my area or one perspective.
No, and I think that you're onto something, and I agree to an extent. And as far as the practices go, I think there's a real, purism problem, if you will. We get into like, this might be just more of a personal struggle myself, as to like, oh well, how regenerative are you? That kind of mindset there. And in my, Brian, I think you said this to me one time, and somebody else may have said it to you or something, where soil health is a journey. And it is. I mean, we're all on different parts of that journey. And I think that's not the question that we should be asking. It's like, how regenerative are you? It's, where are you compared to where you were this time last year? Or, some is better than none, that type of thing. And, we talk, I'm going to be another regenerative ag podcast is August Horseman, who's in Clay's terms would be considered a neighbor. We're in Missouri, so we're neighbors are closer together. But he's about 20 minutes away from me, and he's become a really good friend of mine. And I know that's something we're going to talk about is what purism, how it can really be detrimental to growth, as we focus so much on how we aren't performing instead of where we've come from. At least that's a big struggle of mine.
Yeah. So how can we solve that, the land holding issue? Like, so I had a podcast recently with Zach Smith, who pitched some ideas about fixing the farm bill, and some pretty controversial ideas. But basically he said, you aren't eligible for programs. And as a landowner, your land isn't eligible for programs unless you're adopting some of these practices. And I'm always a fan of solutions that don't involve the stick of the government. But I understand what he's saying too, and what we came up with is that this isn't a stick. It's just a carrot with a hurdle. Like, there's a carrot, but you got to go over this hurdle to get it. And so, maybe that's semantics or whatever, but is there a non-government? I mean, maybe it's just the slow march through the institutions, which was a communist thing, but maybe that's I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think that the four of us have like four very, very different contexts as far as, what's around us and what regenerative looks like and what the typical ranch is. So, I'm here in the Red Hills on a very small piece of the native prairie remnant, right? And that's different from a situation where, I'd be maybe in Missouri and next to Jason and have some crop fields and have a couple pastures of planted grasses. It's a lot different from Jared that has to deal with 2 or 3 feet of snow or more. Like he's laughing at 2-3 feet of snow.
Oh, that's what we've got right now. You're right on.
Oh, geez.
And, Clay, I know you have your own management challenges in your context as well. And one of the things that I've kind of learned in doing, roughly 100 or so episodes is regenerative looks different for everybody. And it's hard to talk about a goal, but it's, I think that more people are starting on the journey, and maybe it is a practice change, but I think that what does regenerative look like? It's so difficult to nail down because it has to be contextually appropriate.
Yeah, no doubt. I think that Understanding Ag knocked it out of the park when they added that 6th principle of soil health of context, because, not only your context, what works where you're at, but also what has been done to the land that you're on, because that's going to color your strategy starting out for sure.
I agree the context is so important to consider, but I've also seen context used almost as a scapegoat of like, well, yeah, sure, grazing is great for the land, but I'm in northern Minnesota where it's cold, so grazing doesn't make sense here. We have winter, so I'm just going to raise corn and soybeans. Or context, I have this really productive soil, so I don't have to worry about, all of my, maintaining my topsoil. I've got 2 feet of it or something like that. It can almost be a scapegoat in two, but when used wrong, it definitely is valuable to consider your context, and if you're set on, you almost have to first, as an individual, determine that you are going to implement soil health principles. You are going to manage your land to the best that you can, and then use context to help figure out what that is. But it seems like a lot of people who maybe come to these things who aren't all bought in and say, well, context, my context doesn't really work with all this stuff. You use context as the way to not apply a practice because you're trying to pick the wrong practice for your context, as opposed to using context to pick the right practice for your context.
And they're looking for a magic bullet. They're looking for the easy magic bullet answer.
But that's what they've been sold by Big Ag for how many years?
Well,
post World War II?
Yeah. Yep. One of your questions earlier about education, where are people getting their education? It's kind of frustrating how much of our information, I get frustrated when I go to like these U of M cow-calf days is what they have, or like the different local kind of things that we put on, or I'm on our local cattlemen's board. And when they talk about, well, we just need to get maybe a feed salesman to come and talk to us. And it's like, why are we're hosting an educational event and there's vets selling us on the next whatever program and vaccination program. And there's, and vets coming to talk to us about how to calve in January and stuff. And there's salesmen trying to sell us, creep feed and everything to get the more pounds out of it. And it's like, let's look, that's what I think the value of these podcasts are, is that, I'm not getting anything from my listener as far as they're not paying. I'm not selling anything. I'd be lying if in full disclosure, we raise bulls for Faro Cattle Company. So I'm not trying to like hide that. We definitely have some things that we're marketing, but the vast majority of my podcast is not at any relation to Faro Cattle Company. It's just talking to people who are doing things differently and sharing that experience. And so if we can, I think a lot of it's just going to start with, I do think we're making a big difference. Amazing. I imagine you all are getting people reaching out to you as well, saying, I'm excited about what I'm hearing. Like, this is cool. Like, hope that they never thought was possible and stuff that they hear on these podcasts. That's what it takes. And hopefully then they can dig into the other resources out there, the more expertise than we can offer in a 1-hour call with somebody else, so.
I think some of the favorite interactions I've had with fans One of them I actually had on my podcast, Jared Kirst. He started listening because he was looking for some content on Bitcoin, and just like he said, I just got ate up with regenerative, just had to do it. And I met him in person out in Denver at Regenerate. We talked for a while, got to know him a little bit. I was like, dude, we should do a podcast. And he's like, about what? And I said, just get on and tell your story. You sure that? Like, yeah, don't worry about it. It'll be fine. Yeah. And I think that, meeting those people and getting their stories, and it doesn't matter if you've been doing regenerative ag, soil health stuff for 6 months or 16 years. Like, I'm kind of over people trying to one up each other about, well, I've been doing regenerative ag since 1989. Like, nobody called it regenerative ag in 1989. What are you talking about? Like, what are you even saying? But I guess what I'm getting at is, I don't know where I'm getting at, and I do that a lot.
It was good though. I appreciated going with you as far as
I was captivated for sure.
Yeah.
Take you to this other wonderful place. Forget where I'm going, and now that's where we
know what we call that? We call that being in the hereafter. We get where we were going, and we were like, "What was I here after?
Why am I here? Why did I walk into this room?
Exactly.
Oh, there's my coffee cup."
I wasn't here for my coffee cup, but I'm glad I found it where I left it last.
Yeah.
That's where you usually find stuff. The last place you look.
Yep.
I'm curious for you guys, all of you guys listen to a lot of podcasts too. I don't know. I don't even find myself so much listening now for the specific ideas. It seems like every now and then an episode I'll hear something, it's like, oh, I never thought of that. That's brilliant. But I don't know, for most of it, it's almost like going just for the reinforcement of the ideas that I have, a real reminder that you're not alone, just the excitement and to hear the stories that people being successful as the motivation to keep going, and not for the specifics anyway. It seems like to me, I don't know where you guys fall in that when you're listening.
Yeah, listening and podcasting myself. It's like people come on to the podcast and they're like Brian said, like, what are we going to talk about? I'm like, we'll talk. There's no rules. That's a beauty part about podcasting versus like live radio or something. There's no point to be made. We're just going to go have a conversation. And like you say, that reinforcement of ideas is really powerful because it's like you say anymore. It's like you don't. Every once in a while, you come across, well, man, that's totally out there in left field and really cool, something to explore. But a lot of things are reinforcement of truths we already know, and I think that's really powerful. And no matter the more times you hear, how many times does something really stick the first, second, third time you hear it? For me, I'm way too dumb for it to stick so early. So it takes that many times for something to really take hold. So as far as that's concerned, I think it's really important to keep having those, keep hearing and having. Sometimes seems like the same conversation over, but maybe in different, to use the word again, context.
And I think that it's a lot of times it's not that it was something different that was said. It's the same content, but it's said in a different way that connects with you, and that's why you don't get offended that somebody catches it when they hear it from somebody else rather than hearing it from you, because that's just the way their mind is wired, and you can't possibly communicate it in a way that's going to connect with everybody. And so that's one of the things that I think sets podcasting apart, like you said, Jason, from radio, is almost every podcast you listen to, and let's get the language right, people. A podcast is a production. An episode is an individual piece of that production. Every podcast you listen to, the host will say, we need more podcasts, and I started saying that early on because I heard everybody else who was a podcaster say it. We need more cow-focused regenerative agriculture podcasts, and the wish is starting to come true. But, early adopters like Brian and Jared and Jason were a big part of that. But we need more people to say it with their voice, because their voice is going to connect with a different audience than my voice or Brian's or Jared's or Jason's.
And it's funny that you say, again, going back to like live radio, live TV. Did you guys see the time when Will Harris was on Fox News?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just such a terrible representation of what he is all about. And that's where podcasting, absolutely takes the, we got to get this point made in this amount of time. And there's none of that in podcasting. I think that's something that makes it really unique and special. And really my favorite part about it is I'm not a rules person. I don't like rules at all. So there's no rules to podcasting. And that's probably why I like it so much.
That Will Harris interview just made me wonder how much money Stuart Varney owes Bill Gates. That's all I wondered about that.
Yeah.
I'll have to watch that. I haven't seen that. So
it's actually pretty infuriating to be honest, and there is you'll just have to watch it because it's just
listen to Will on Joe Rogan first, then go watch
I have listened to that.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, please do. He was excellent.
Who listened to the Bone Collector, the Bone Guy on Joe Rogan?
I didn't.
No, me either.
Oh, you guys don't know about John Reeves and the Alaska Boneyard on Rogan?
Uh-uh.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe we'll talk about it next time. But
I'm not in defense building season yet, Brian. I think my podcast time is limited.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Yeah. So Jason, how do we get out of our echo chamber? And I guess what I'm trying to ask is, how do we get out of our echo chamber and reach and have more conversations about mental health? And I know that's a very broad and big thorny subject, but there's, we see it. The four of us, we see it not on a daily basis, but often we see people in our community, other producers struggling, and maybe they're labor with a difficult ownership management situation. Maybe their ownership with, an impossible management and labor task or people. So, and this is what I'm kind of challenging myself. Like, how do we get out of a regenerative ag echo chamber, and how do we reach more people with a positive message that, there is light, there's hope in agriculture. There's people that are succeeding. There's people that are not sick working on the land.
So I think a big part of it is just having like actual adult conversations with folks. This is something Carrie's my wife, talk about with just in regards to anything hard. Is like, you just have to sit down and have adult conversations. As hard as that, as simple as that might seem to say, not many of us are I'm not very good at having real adult conversations with folks. And that's really the only way that change and getting out of your echo chamber, because I don't like to argue with people that much. I know sometimes I might seem argumentative with people, but I'm really not. I'm actually very agreeable with people. So it's really hard for me to have conflict with people. So, and at the same time, it's also hard for me to have my beliefs kind of challenged at times too. But I think something that's really strong in trying to talk about the hard things is you either can have your mind changed in a positive way, or you're stronger in your convictions by talking to somebody and talking out what you do with somebody and how to move forward. No matter either way, what is it's one of the seven habits of highly effective people is to create win-win situations. And to me, that's a win-win situation when you actually have these hard conversations and people come away with it with either no matter what, either what I talked about, either way is a positive outcome.
Very good.
Jared, I see you thinking.
Wheels are turning, not much coming up.
Well, I want to go back to something that Brian said earlier about preparing for demographic collapse. That is, I think that's very true, that's coming. So is it time for us to prepare, or is it time for us to prepare the next generation? How do we prepare?
by generation, do you mean like this big land transfer? Or what are you kind of?
Brian's term, so we can let him define.
I would say the land transfer. I'd say land transfer from existing absentee landowners that are like, and I'm saying this because this is what looks like in my trailer hood, right? A lot of absentee landowners that have tillage ground, tillable ground, arable farmland. May have a pivot on it, may just be dry land. There's probably a lot of that that's going to change hands. And, you know, I'm sure every single property or every tract is going to have its own unique situation, whether it's, you know, divided interest between 67 different heirs that are everywhere. You know, there's a single trustee or the guy died without a will. Like every single one of them is going to be different. And it's, you know, we talked about, you know, that triad of management, ownership, and labor. And, you know, okay, so if somebody new wants to come in and be all three of those legs of the pot, that's a significant startup capital. Like there's farm ground in, where was it? Iowa, or one of the I states that was over $30,000 an acre. Like it's just absolutely absurd. I asked somebody that's familiar with, you know, what land is trading for now, what stuff was kind of trading for in Southwest Missouri. Wow. I mean, $4,000 or $5,000 an acre for degraded stuff.
Yeah. It doesn't take much to get $4,000 an acre around here.
And where I'm going with that is like, you know, the economics are pretty clear. Like it's very hard to compete in the cow calf business. Like it's been very difficult for quite a while to go buy a ranch in the cow calf business or to go start up in the commodity crop space and even get started in the commodity crop space just because of the, you know, high capital startup cost. So I really kind of think about this coming change. I don't know that something in the economics has to change. Something in the labor economics of food has to change. Well, land values are just going to get really screwy.
There's so many questions I have on the land specific conversation. Anyway, there's a realtor in my neighborhood who I've talked with. He's a member of our church, and he, over the last several decades, he's 60s, 70s, something like that, has purchased a lot of land in this area. And he said, you know, people my whole life have been talking about this massive land transfer that's just around the corner. And it just hasn't come, or it does happen, but it doesn't happen out loud. It's to the next generation at death, or it's sold privately between the landowner and the person who's been renting it for years. And so he says, I'm not counting on, and I wouldn't recommend anybody count on waiting for this big land transfer, which I don't know. He could be totally wrong. That's one person, one story, but it's an interesting thought anyway. And I think about my dad, how many times I've driven. He says, well, I remember when I was looking for my first farm and this one was for sale and that one was for sale and that one was for sale. And now today it seems like there's one property for sale a year anywhere close and it's crazy expensive. And so I don't know if this big land transfer will happen. It won't, if it will happen. I mean, yeah, the majority of the land and the wealth is owned by people, but it'll probably be quietly to an heir or to the renter or something like that over time. And I don't know. Yeah, I would love to see some more opportunities come for land. And if they're going to be at prices that they are today, commodity agriculture isn't going to buy it. It's going to be some sort of specialized ag production or off-farm income, more than likely.
Yeah, I mean, for us being, you know, I'm not sure this is where we're going with this or not, but I mean, I guess this is where I'm taking it.
There are no rules.
Right, exactly.
Right, yeah.
But where a big struggle for us is, like you say, that is, they're not even absentee landowners. They are landowners who move from the city, who just, they fall in love with the idea of in our case, ranching, farming. And they are going to they're going to take all the money that they have and try to buy that concept or buy that image of what it looks like. And it makes trying to be a profitable enterprise very hard, and where you're surrounded by, I mean, we're less than 100 miles from St. Louis, so it's very easy for people to move out here, and trying to compete with for purchasing land with that type of land buyer is really hard, and I mean, virtually impossible to make, especially a cow-calf operation, even make sense, even allow it to lose money. You know what I mean? So it's just another type of, not to just focus on what's wrong, but I mean, just another challenge that we're up against.
But it seems like the successful people I've talked to, many of them share the same element to their story when they were young, is that they bought land when everybody thought they were crazy to buy it at the price they bought it at. So, I mean, are we just the newest version of that? Like, well, you're crazy to pay that. But then is it just, I always say, for me personally, speaking for myself, not anybody else, but I always say I'm just too dumb to quit. I think that's part of what success is just being too dumb to quit. Maybe that's just for me. Maybe other people have actual skills and talents and abilities that make them able to be successful apart from that. But is that what it takes? Or is this really beyond the pale of, I can buy land even though everybody thinks I'm crazy and I can make it work?
I think when land does start to trade, and whether, we do see a mass land trade, demographic shift in land ownership, whether we notice it or not, the thing that I'm worried about is, there's a lot of groups seeing farmland, rangeland as a quote safe investment against, whatever double-digit percentage inflation we're having this week. So they come in and they drive up tax bases for everybody else that's trying to make an honest living, that maybe whose ranch hasn't changed hands in 4 or 5 generations or 2. They drive up tax basis. You'll have, and so the danger with that is you're going to have, we could end up with a lot of, investment groups buying up land, corporations buying up land. And that goes back to my argument about, management of the land being totally separated from the goals of ownership, or ownership not being able to clearly articulate goals for the land to management. And, if we are moving towards a different ownership model, I have some thoughts about that. I'll call back to something that Don Schiffelbein said on my podcast, that private land ownership is the bedrock of land stewardship. I mean, if we didn't have people that were out on the land that cared for it every day, that loved the land, we wouldn't, it would all be degraded. To some extent, I challenge that because, maybe there's folks that call themselves conservationists that don't quite know what they're supposed to be conserving. But if we're moving away from a private land ownership model and towards a shared ownership model, what does that mean for the long-term stewardship?
Well, I think it's true. You'll probably never manage and love land as much as the land you own yourself or has some sort of a family tie. But one thing that I am a firm believer in, and something that I think is super cool about this whole regenerative movement anyway, is that building soil and regeneration is not counterproductive to profitability. I mean, they go hand in hand. And so as a manager of land, owned or rented, you're incentivized to manage it well with regenerative practices for your own bottom line. It's kind of a neat thing. I feel like so many people think, it's great. I'd love to manage my land better, but I need to make payments, or I need to pay the bills. But it doesn't have to be either or. They go right alongside each other.
We're just so focused, people, and this is kind of taking it in a different direction. They're so focused on production rather than ROI. And I find that's really disturbing that we've, in the cattle industry, or especially in the cow-calf industry, what's the number one thing we look at? And it seems like it's wean weights, because, that's the thing we can point to. Hey, this is what my calves weighed at weaning time mine are better or yours are better than mine or whatever, you know what I mean? But like, it's just, you're missing so much of the picture there. And I don't think when you really get, like you say, Jared, when you really get down to it, I mean, profitability and soil health go hand in hand. I mean, they're almost they're so close, they're almost the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think we could all point to dozens of conversations we've had with people on our podcast. I just interviewed this morning Alejandro Carrillo and what he's done on his place in the Chihuahua Desert with this management, currently tripling his stocking rate, and his goal is 10xing what his original stocking rate on his place was through management. I mean, there's just it just makes perfect sense. That's financially viable. So why wouldn't we do it? And there's, like I say, dozens more that each of us could point to of people who have done these practices and seen tremendous financial benefit. And that to me is going to be to a lot of the questions we've asked anyway, how we continue to push regenerative agriculture forward as people have a greater understanding of the financials will do it. Anything that long term, and it will do it. And then, that'll also, I think, help there's this land transfer, however it is, if it more towards leased land, movement more towards leased land. I would guess that non-operating owners of land would want to see their land managed better. And so they'll start making farmers do it, even if they maybe wouldn't have otherwise, just because they're coming from, a lot of folks in the city have a land management ethic that it is pretty high. Whether they really know what that means or not, who knows, but they want to see it well managed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I mean, really the one thing that's going to get it happen is to get a bunch of farmers together and get them a free meal and some free hats. That's really the only thing that's going to make it work.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, to kind of tag on to what, the discussion about, bullseyes and what performance metrics we're using to measure, right? And, you guys threw one out about weaning weight, and I think that Dallas likes to change that around about pounds weaned per cow exposed. Okay, I get that. And something else they love to say in that school that shall not be named is, it's no good hitting bullseyes if you're aiming at the wrong target. And I think that's kind of where we're at with a lot of ag is there's a lot of producers that are aiming at the wrong target that ownership and management has given them.
Yeah. And to put a little bit, I mean, kind of my role in this whole deal is the people aspect and the mental health aspect of it. How frustrating is it and mentally taxing is it to keep chasing those wrong types of bullseyes? How just it, you want to talk about sustainability and regenerability. Is that regenerability a word?
Made it up.
I think Will Winter's word is regenerativity, but I'm pretty sure he made that one up too. So
I like it.
But a key factor to that is the human aspect of it, and the human, how much time and how much energy you're putting into it, and to keep chasing those bloated and artificial numbers is mentally taxing. So to step back away from that, that's talking from experience here, is so liberating. And whenever you're enjoying what you do more, the possibilities are endless.
And I think it's more attractive to the next generation, which also helps with the demographic collapse.
Yes.
And one thought that I'm going to kind of think it through as I talk it here, so forgive me if it doesn't make the most sense, but kind of to Brian's question about what is going to be this impact of people of moving more towards a rented maybe agriculture system as opposed to an owned, if that's the way it goes. What'll be interesting is I would say that for so many farms, they've been subsidized by owned land and equity that they had cash flow, but they didn't have profit because they never had to have profit because they had the cash flow from the land equity and the rent. And so if we move to a business where the vast majority of your land base is rented, that will force you to be more profitable because you don't have that equity to fall back on, or that free land rent and stuff. So that'll be interesting to see. I mean, at that point, then not only will businesses or farms, if hobbies or whatever, will these farms not be able to just carry on because, well, granddad had 500 acres paid for and stuff. They'll be forced to operate and stand on their own 2 feet.
I think that is that a scary thing though? that those rented lands, to me, those rented lands will probably be owned by large corporations, I would guess, given the prices that we're going to look at, and so is that better than where we're at now, I guess, in your mind? And yeah, I think their driving force is going to probably be something like carbon credits, but who knows if that's ever going to materialize. So I don't know. Is that the way you see that playing out?
I don't know if it's better or worse. I would say, I would prefer to have more local land ownership. The better or worse is it's more so what's reality, and seems like not necessarily just corporations or anything too, but the larger farms that do have a tremendous amount of equity are the ones that are buying it and stuff too, the larger scaled farms. And it better or worse doesn't matter. It's just where it's going. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. What do you guys think, Brian? I see you're thinking so.
Well, it's funny you brought up carbon, because there's some producers that are at least on their second round of a second year of a carbon program and like getting checks. And there's a part of me that kind of looks at the whole, tillage commodity system that's well established, well researched, and it's, you can go to university, learn, University of Illinois, learn how to grow corn at the Bayer Monsanto Institute of Corn. You go buy some farm ground, and I'm sure, you can pencil that out over 30 years, how much you're going to spend on combine, how much you're going to spend on fuel, how much you're going to pay the guy doing it, how much the investment's going to be worth at the end. And I kind of feel like we're not dealing with stupid big money companies like, oil majors. Okay. These people are not dumb. Like Shell does not have unintelligent people working for them on their carbon problem. Like there's a part of me that thinks that, there's some big emitters or there's some big hedge funds that are just waiting to figure out how they can still grow corn in a tillage system and sequester carbon. Like, because it's all the mechanical capture things that keep coming out for carbon, like they're really expensive, $50, $60 a ton. And compared to the price, compared to what good practices do to the land that store carbon, it's like, you do these things to improve your ranch and then suddenly carbon checks start showing up. Well, that's awful neat. But I'm worried about, big corporations coming in and locking up and figuring out how to kind of game that system. Does that make sense? And when that money shows up, you better have your position.
Well, I get frustrated and concerned with the whole carbon credit system, just because it seems like everybody, the idea behind it is the goal is to sequester carbon, but every player in it, their goal is not necessarily to sequester carbon. The farmer is trying to figure out how can I make more money. The guy buying the credit is trying to figure out how can I look better to my customers. And the guy in the middle is trying to make money on both ends. Nobody's actually trying to figure out how to I actually sequester carbon. And it's just kind of, I don't know, because of that, I worry about like you're saying, will they find a way to just game the system? I mean, I see so many of these are based on just practices again. Plant a cover crop. Well, if you plant it after you finish harvest in the middle to end of November and you till it under in the spring before, right away, before it ever really starts germinating, have you really made any progress? But you got paid because you did a practice. Like the carbon credit thing has potential. And I like the idea of some sort of a free market solution where, companies are paying and farmers are being paid as, outside of the government. But I get worried about its effectiveness potential.
Why we're not seeing carbon programs for a lot for tillage ground, like you just described. They're practice based, and there's some companies kind of in the space trying to push those programs, and I get it because of who their audience is and the way their audience needs. They want a magic bullet, right? But like we've already discussed, this, it's not a magic bullet, because regenerative agriculture, yes, it's a journey. It's also not practices. It's not a system. It's a whole shift in mindset. And what they're running into is they want to measure the corn every year right before harvest, so they can, have this really inflated carbon number and then till it up to go plant cover crops. Well, as soon as you till the soil, that carbon gets released. So how are we going to account for that? And I think that's where they're hung up, is because any amount of tillage releases almost all that carbon that was stored. I've seen infographics that have been put out about how much CO2 the Corn Belt absorbs and how much oxygen they produce, and what that looks like for one day out of the year. But that's not taking into account what that cornfield looks like for the other 7 or 8 months out of the year when it's fallow and bare, or what that that winter wheat field around here looks like for 6 months out of the year. That's not taking those things into account. And I think that when they start looking at things like permanence, like how long can this credit be stored in this ground? Well, it can't be tilled. So I think that's where the disconnect is. I think that's what they're trying to figure out.
That's the barrier between wider use of carbon credits, do you think?
I think that's one of the things that's holding it up right now in the space. That, and there's no real official carbon market. There's no real official government guidance, on what carbon credits are, or how they may be bought, sold, traded, or what they actually represent. I mean, it's kind of, I say it's kind of a Wild West. I say it's kind of a gold rush. And I think, both those statements are kind of philosophically true. And if you think about, carbon markets blowing wide open in the next couple of years in terms of a gold rush, who gets rich in a gold rush? I mean, pioneers catch all the arrows. It's usually maybe a couple people at the front that find the big strike. Then miners flood the area, and the rest of the wealth is generated by people mining the miners.
And by mining the miners, are you saying people who come into the boomtown and set up their shop and sell things to them?
Yes. I don't want to be the guy out prospecting for gold. I want to be the guy in town selling shovels and pans.
So, but that's pretty much what agriculture's been for the last 40 years, or since World War II, right?
Yeah.
Is the profitability and the lion's share of the money has gone to ag business.
And I'll accept that. I'll totally accept that that's just, kind of taken over for, some of the people that show up in the yard in brand new pickups and try to sell you crap. I get that. I recognize that.
Yep. No, and I'm not saying it's right, wrong, or indifferent. I'm just saying that's basically where we've been too, right? I mean, in my understanding.
I'm sometimes I'm kind of okay getting screwed as long as you tell me how you're screwing me.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's the nature of the world, right? I think in a world designed by God, this is how those things play out. The free market system is the best way, the least violent way to allocate scarce resources. And so we are going to kind of have to default back to this system in some way. And
I think there's plenty of chili in the pot.
Yes.
And we just need to be better about letting other folks have a little taste.
And, well, I don't know. Don't want to get to upsetting people and stuff too, but I do think that most operations have the potential to generate pretty incredible profit. I mean, there's a reason we talk about the Ranching for Profit School so much. It comes up so many times is because people go to it. They learn some pretty awesome things that they make differences in their business that change the game. And some of them are pretty simple things like reducing overhead. It's amazing how many people with a small amount of cattle or whatever, how many dollars in equipment I see, tied up in an enterprise relatively small that's completely a decision made by an individual. It has nothing to do with John Deere screwing you out of, something or the salesman selling you. I mean, you made the decision. We made the decision to buy a $175,000 tractor to feed 40 cows or something like that. I mean, that's a decision. It's not the cow calf. There's no money in cows. It's decisions. And so, I mean, I don't know. I'm a guess a believer in personal responsibility and owning our decisions, and that's fine either way. But kind of back,
how dare you?
Oh boy, I stirred the pot.
No, that's awesome. I think that's you hit the nail on the head. It is ultimately you were the one who signed on the dotted line.
Yep.
As far as whatever input or equipment you use, it's ultimately comes down to you.
I got a little Dave Pratt quote, a little Dave Pratt story. So this is 2006, first time I went to RFP. Pretty sure it was toward the end of, or maybe it was like in the middle of economics day. This guy stands up, and Dave Pratt was my instructor for this one. And this guy stands up and he asks like this 5-minute question. I'm sure you guys know the archetype I'm talking about. They ask this hyper specific question that if they just change one or two things of the details that they said, they wouldn't have this problem, right? I mean, you get what I'm talking about. So this guy has this like hyper specific question that's, he's going through excuse and justification and whatever. And he gets to the end and Dave says, "Are you sure you should own cows?" And this guy was just like, he was gutted. And I think that's one of the most important things that gets people messed up at ranching for profit is why do you ranch? Why do you do what you do?
I've got some notes here that I'll go on if nobody else has anything, when Jason's done.
Well, it goes back to that human element of, this is how I always see the spin on things is you have to have a reason for why you're doing things. Otherwise you're just, you're a hamster on a wheel. And he brings up a really good point. And when we say, why are you doing what you do? And for some people, it is they're enjoying the lifestyle or they're enjoying raising their kids. That's me to a certain extent. But you need to, but it's like you said earlier, you need to recognize that from the very beginning. You need to recognize what you actually find out what you actually enjoy about what you're doing and do that. We make things so complicated so often when in fact it really doesn't need to be complicated. Just try to figure out how to make a little money to doing things that you enjoy and you'll be happy. It sounds very oversimplified, but is it really though?
Not oversimplified, no.
It's a good question that I've wondered about too, is like you say, you find something you really enjoy, they make a little bit of money too. This talk on profit is not saying that it's wrong to not be truly profitable in the ranching for profit way. That it's okay to just have enough and to live off the equity in your land and equity in your cattle, essentially, but work for free. You generate enough cash flow to have a good living and enjoy what you do. There's nothing wrong with that. And it's kind of a question I've wondered and is about around this idea of enough. And does something change when you have enough? Does at that point now, like when you have enough cash flow, whatever that is, $80,000 a year, you're set for life. You could enjoy your lifestyle for however long. Does your goals on how you manage your business and operate your business change at that point? I don't know. I haven't reached that yet, so I don't have the answer, but I'm curious. That's something I've wondered is I've figured, even just for myself anyway, that I have too much of a mindset on focusing on profit sometimes and growth and building something. And it's like, is that dangerous? You see a lot of, I don't know, it's dangerous.
I think that's a character question. Success won't change who you are. It will just make you more of who you are. And so I think that if you are generous with a little of what you have, if you are successful, you'll be more generous with that. And I think that we have to, you have to decide like what standard of living you are going to have. And then beyond that, the world is your oyster as far as places to give money away with in some, if that's your goal.
Sorry, I just had a visitor. He came in and he was like, he realized I was doing a podcast, and he looked at me and he like had this look of horror on his face. Like,
oh crap, did I just ruin it?
Yeah. No
Magic
worries.
of editing.
Yeah, don't worry, we'll fix it in post.
Yeah.
and then not fix it in post. That's the best.
Then not fix it. I love it. Yeah, I love that.
Glad I'm not the only one that does that.
So I think this is a connected conversation, and it's because I'm going to talk to a bunch of FFA kids in a week or two, probably about the time this comes out, actually. But how do we talk to the next generation then? This whole conversation really has been about, what land ownership is going to look like in the future, and the factors affecting that. So how do we talk to the next generation about preparing themselves to succeed in agriculture?
Well, since y'all have already pointed out my youth, I'll listen to your wise wisdom, elders and experienced folks on this one.
That means Brian has to start.
Yeah.
Okay. So the concept that's kind of in my head is, you have your book of life, book of the ranch, book of the career. Okay. And it's in 3 parts. I'm in the middle of my book. Okay. Jared, Jason, you guys are probably still, in the first, you guys are still in part 1. You're still writing the first part of your book. My dad, he's writing the last few pages of the last chapter. To be continued, to be continued, to be continued. Like, and that's not saying that he's not in good health. That's just saying, like, that's the phase of life that, those are kind of the phases of life that we go through. And being kind of still in the middle of my story, I've started to realize that, I am in the middle of my story, and I do need to start figuring it out. And we've kind of got that on a timeline to start, some milestones to start figuring out succession planning. And it's a challenge. Like, it's a huge challenge. We talk about how to get people back to the farm all the time on all 4 of these podcasts. And the common theme, it's got to be profitable. So we got to keep innovating. We got to keep moving forward and trying to do more with less, faced with ever increasing cost of doing business. I don't think we'll ever see $3 diesel again. Be awful nice. I'm sure there's a lot of us that are driving diesel pickups that are feeling that pain, but you got to do what you got to do. So one story does bring me a lot of hope. And my friend Jay Young, when we were up at Salina, he said in a room full of people, he said that he has made his farm in Northwest Kansas by using regenerative principles. He's made his farm so profitable that he can afford to farm less acres and still make a living. So what he's thinking about doing is letting another young farmer come in on some of those acres that he doesn't need to make a living and get started farming. So maybe that's where we start. I think that's a wonderful concept, and maybe that's a good place to start.
I think that's a really incredible thing that he's doing, because we talk about that's one of the biggest barriers is startup capital, and to have someone who can. And I've heard stories very similar to this, and it's always just so fascinating to me when somebody can do something like that, because it truly shows they care about it going on. You know, they care about the tradition. They care about the land enough to allow somebody who's eager enough to and willing enough to come in and do the same type of work. That's I think that's very honorable and very motivating to do. And I think that's, again, we talk about grassroots level of making things work. And I think that's probably the ultimate way. For me, it goes back. First thing is it has to be profitable, right? We talk about that all the time. But it also has to be, we have to enjoy it too. I mean, we have to do it. I remember so many times, not so much my dad, but my one brother, I doubt he'll listen to this. Anyway, he yelled at me all the time. I got yelled at all the time. Everything was always my fault. And it was no wonder I didn't want to continue with it. I mean, I hated it for a time. Like, I had no business. I had no interest in coming back to the operation whatsoever. And then, like, there was a time where I realized, man, I'm becoming that guy with my own kids. I was like, gosh, how awful is that? And, you know, just changing our mindset about how we work and how we work with the younger generation. And don't get me wrong, I lose my temper with my kids plenty. But trying to rein that in and, like, understand why we're here and understand that I want them to enjoy this enough that they may want to do it like I did someday. That's really a huge motivating factor for me. And again, that's on a very small and specific scale to me, but I mean, that's what I have control over.
Yeah. And I think that, again, back to that personal responsibility thing, that's all we can do, right? is take control of what we have control over. And then I think the power of these platforms is sharing those ideas with other people and inviting them to take control over what they have control over. And, you know, I hope it's not just the same 15 people listening to each one of our episodes, that we have some there. It's just not one circle. I hope there's 4 circles in that Venn diagram and there's some overlap in all of them, but there's more people out there listening and starting to make changes.
Hey, you have 15?
I was going to say that. Send some my way. Yeah.
Yeah, but like 8 of them have the same last name as me. Right. I downloaded on my phone and my wife's phone, so
that's good.
That's fair. I download on my phone and on my iPad.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm obviously to Clay's question was like, what do we tell the younger generation and stuff? I'm still in that younger generation and trying to figure out a lot of this stuff myself, like you mentioned. But one of the coolest things that I would say has come out of this podcast, kind of like I mentioned earlier, why I'm doing it is not necessarily for the specific ideas, but for the motivation and the encouragement. How many people that I've had the opportunity to talk to who are starting from nothing and have built something still today is proof that there's no reason anybody can't. So if this is something somebody wants to do, seek out the right education and the right information from the right people in the right places. Seek out the wisdom of those with, who are doing what you want to do, but then go make it happen. And it might not be in your neighborhood. That's one thing I would say is, I wouldn't say I don't want to say it's negative. I don't mean to complain at all about the fact that I have a family farm here and stuff. We're fortunate. I'm very blessed to have this opportunity, but I think that I have had many opportunities and seen multiple opportunities come up in areas away from home. If you're willing to move, willing to do something different, there's opportunity out there. So, yeah.
And don't be afraid to move like Jim Garris did just because that's what he wanted to do.
Yeah. Take off for Idaho.
The Pacimaroy Valley is a pretty place.
And apparently they have fiber optic to his place 40 miles from a population of like 12 and I'm an hour from the Twin Cities population, 3 million, and 40 minutes from another couple 100,000 population. And I have horrible internet. So
I'm in the same situation.
Ridiculous.
I've got fiber optic at my house. and I'm 35
Really?
miles from the nearest gas station in my house.
How does that even happen?
It's
That's what I don't
I have
understand
fiber
it.
too.
It's a government grant. You just your telephone cooperative has to take the grant to do it, and I don't know if it's a population density issue that you guys are in too densely populated areas, so the grant isn't even available or what. But I think they had
Too
10
many
years.
people can use it where you're at, so we're not going to give it to you.
Right, exactly.
They had 10 years to get fiber to every doorstep on their network, and they got us in like year 2 or 3 of the project. So
Wow, that's awesome.
yep.
So the way that works is the federal government hands out those subsidies to small telecoms based on telephone subscribers. So I have to have a home telephone line in order to get fiber internet to my house. And I can't even tell you when the last person I don't think I've ever given that number out, and I've lived here over 10 years. I don't think I've ever really given that number out to anybody as a serious way to contact me. The only reason that I have to have that phone, like I can't have fiber internet without the phone.
Jared, do you have a landline, Jared?
No.
Yeah,
No,
so I
that
don't
left when my grandparents moved out. So.
Yeah, I don't either.
I don't have cell phone service at my house, so I do have.
Yeah,
a
that's
landline.
another thing. Yeah.
I do have a landline, but it was the first time, I think like 3 years after my wife and I got married. So 2009, we got rid of the landline and hadn't had one since, probably 10 years. We were without a landline for probably 10 years. And, same thing, got mine when we moved to a place where we didn't have cell phone coverage and needed internet. And, I know who's calling when that phone rings because there's only a few people that actually call me on that number.
Yeah.
Similar to Brian.
I'm not even sure the ringer is turned on that phone.
Do you have anything else in your outline, Brian?
Outline? Who had an outline? We were supposed to come with outlines?
This was your idea.
Yeah. I had a couple more questions, but we can talk about those on the next one because this is good.
Not trying to shut it down.
to-
I was just wondering, if anybody came with an axe to grind or whatever.
How did you say that? I got this problem with this Brian Alexander guy.
Yeah.
Well, now that you mention it, that guy that runs that herd quitter, we got a bone to pick.
I'm just happy to be here. So, well, this has been good. We'll have to do it again because I don't know. I think this was fun to chat. I think it's nice to just have conversation and see where it goes. So this was good.
I think it was really impressive that we only had to shut it down once, like the initial time earlier. When was that, in the fall? And then come back and we got it on the second time, all of us together.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty darn impressive.
Well, here's the next challenge. Let's get all 4 of us in the same room for like a conference or a meeting or something. That way we can get, like, if there's somebody out there with a soil health, regenerative ag conference, cattle conference, anybody that needs 4 guys to come and be on a panel, we're volunteering. I'll volunteer voluntold the rest of us.
Yeah.
We have no say in the matter now.
Yeah.
Out there.
It'd be fun.
No, I agree. I totally agree.
You can always say no, but I think it'd be a lot of fun to get all 4 of us on a stage with hot mics in front of a crowd.
That'd be cool.
Absolutely. What's what's central location? Not that we have to go, because that's like the Sandhills of Nebraska probably is the central location for us.
Probably roughly Valentine, Nebraska, but that's not really that great of a place to go right now.
Oh, there's
Kansas City.
There's a great bull sale in Valentine, Nebraska with good group of bulls from a certain Minnesota farmer there. So
shameless
just
plug.
throwing that out there. But
Oh, yes.
Did there.
shameless plug.
That was great. Perfect.
Good.
Maybe Kit will help us out. He'll give us the platform. That could be the meeting the night before. Don't they always do a meeting the night before?
Meeting.
Yeah.
Pre-sale meeting. Yep.
We could just sit on the
as long as
auction
you're
block.
willing to go to all 4 fall sales. Y'all willing to travel for?
Oh, we have to go to all 4 fall sales?
Well, he usually likes to make one person, do the rounds of them all.
Sure,
So.
sure. We could just sit on the auction block at the sale and do it. Wouldn't that be cool?
Yeah.
That'd be
That
fun.
would be cool.
Yeah.
Broadcast the whole thing.
Yep. I think we should, somebody who knows Kit Farrow, who talks to him on his podcast fairly regularly, should see if he can make that happen.
Yeah. Too bad I don't have a connection to him.
I didn't mean to kill it. I'm sorry. I was just didn't know if somebody else had it.
Why don't we all kind of plug our own podcasts,
That's a good call.
just in case for somebody who
Just in case that
is
Venn
listening.
diagram isn't a circle.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I've only got 13 in mind, so I'm working my way up to Clay. So
Yeah. Perfect.
A little jealous of you guys at double digits. Well, go first, Jason, since you
I will.
brought it up.
So I have the Ag State of Mind podcast. We release every Monday. My big focus is mental health and agriculture, how it can apply to us on our operations and how we live our best lives because of doing the things that we love and enjoy. So that's where I'm at. I have huge thanks to all of you guys for having me on your podcast. It's been a really fun journey.
You're doing a great job too, by the way.
Thank you, sir.
Yep. All of you guys are. I mean, yeah, it's been awesome to see.
Thank you, Podfather.
I'll go next, I guess. I just, whenever I have the opportunity, I direct people to ranchingpodcast.com. As of the recording of this episode, there are 277 episodes on that page. You can find somebody that you like or dislike and listen to them. And, I'm not opposed to hate listens. If you're hate listening, go ahead. That's fine.
Yeah. And I've got the Herd Quitter podcast. Talk to farmers and ranchers who aren't afraid to think differently, and hopefully find some success out of that. So you can find that anywhere you listen to podcasts or on Instagram and Facebook. Although I don't post all that regularly, I do get an episode. I don't post on social media. I do get an episode out every Monday so far. Hoping to keep that trend going.
Over 100 episodes. That's quite a streak.
Yeah.
Nice
And
work.
last week was about the closest I came. I thought I accidentally deleted my audio right after I finished editing at 11:30 at night, and I released it 1. I was about to just call it, but then I found it somewhere. So I found it. So yeah, haven't lost it yet.
Nice.
That's a close one. I've made it to noon on Saturday and not had a Monday podcast and still made release. So, I am Red Hills Rancher. I'm the host of the Ranching Reboot podcast. Tagline I've been kicking around is rebooting your thinking about farmers, ranchers, food systems, and the people that operate them. So if you already listen to one podcast, what's one more for the rest of your day?
Yeah.
And like everybody else, Monday mornings.
And I think that there's the other thing is I still get emails from people asking about starting podcasts, and I don't think we've reached the upper limit of our audience's ability to consume content yet, because I think that they have a lot of time out on the road, in the pasture, whatever they're doing, where they can still listen to more. There's still more room in this space for more podcasts, I think.
You can only listen to the same 12 songs on satellite radio so many times.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else?
I think I'm good, Podfather. This has been a lot of fun.
Good.
I'm glad we made this work, gentlemen.
Yeah.
I'm glad
Thanks,
you had
guys.
the idea, Brian.
Yeah. Thanks, Brian. This is all Brian's idea. So
Yeah.
thanks, buddy.
Okay, I'll own it. And if it turns out that it's horrible, we don't ever have to do it again.
Yeah. Yeah. After they hear this, then for sure Kit won't want us. So yeah.
And this episode is brought to you by Farming Without the Bank. None of you are farming like you did 100 years ago. So why are you financing it like you did 100 years ago? The biggest part of your operation is the money that runs through your hands, and you let someone else control that. The bank gets the final say in what you get money for and when you pay it back. For many, this is a great relationship until it's not. Farming Without the Bank shows you how you can take back control of your money so you can make the bank plan B instead of plan A. This is done by creating your own banking system that you own and control. To learn more, tune into the Farming Without the Bank podcast or go to farmingwithoutthebank.com to get the book. Once you've read the book, Mary Jo will meet with you one-on-one and help you determine where and how to get started. She will most likely also touch on some estate transition ideas, financing ideas, business growth or startup ideas, and many other things that she has experience with from helping thousands of farmers and ranchers. Go to farmingwithoutthebank.com today or check out the Farming Without the Bank podcast. Very excited next week to share with you a discussion with Wally Olson and John Haskell. Both of them are coming on, and they are going to be talking about the why and the how of scaling a business properly, and how scale is different than growth, and what we need to do to approach this in a way that can be very helpful. So look forward to that, and we will see you again real soon with another episode of the Working Cows podcast.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.